It's July 17th, 2023. This is Sarah Ashton Cirillo, Junior Sergeant in the Armed Forces of Ukraine, coming to you from Territorial Defense Forces Media Studios in Kyiv. We are live and have a packed show. I want to say hello to everyone on YouTube, of course Twitter, and here we are on Instagram as well. So we are going to begin on a solemn note. 9 years ago today, the Russian terrorists brought down Malaysian Airways flight MH17. President Zelensky put out a message earlier today. Like all of us, he sends his hearts, his thoughts and his prayers to the families. Terrorism is something that we have lived under now for more than 500 days and for more than 9 years in certain parts of Ukraine. Those flying over who were taken down in eastern Ukraine by Gherkin and his associates at the command of the Kremlin will pay. President Zelensky addressed that, saying he promises that those from the terrorist state will pay for their actions. President Zelensky understands as well as we do that Russia is a terrorist state. President Zelensky also touched on something earlier as well, along the same theme of what Deputy Defense Minister Hannah Mallor put out last night. The battle for liberation is becoming more and more difficult by the day. It's an extremely difficult path that we are going to be following as members of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine themselves to make certain we can achieve the 1991 borders, full liberation of Ukraine, and to guarantee President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula is implemented. We will manage this complete liberation, but you must understand that it will take time. Again, as General Zaluzhny has stated, it's not a video game. Moving on to really good news. Deputy Defense Minister Hannah Mallor gave us an update earlier today regarding different areas of operation that we had liberated during the course of the ongoing counter-offensive. The total number is 18 square kilometers this week alone and 210.5 square kilometers in total since the beginning of the counter-offensive a little bit more than 6 weeks ago. To give you an idea, the invaders took less than that over the course of 6 months that we have now taken back in 6 weeks. So again, while the fighting is difficult and there's great sacrifices being made by everyone in Ukraine, armed forces, civilians, government leaders, our command, and those allies of ours outside the borders, we are accomplishing our goal. Moving on to accomplishing our goal, I've had some questions this week about what's going on in Tavria. It seems like every day we're talking about one or two companies being liquidated, killed or wounded from the Russian enemy in Tavria direction. Interestingly enough, we don't have a company killed today. We can announce 50 Russian soldiers surrendered in the Tavria direction. This coming from General Tavarsky himself. Moving on, we can also talk about something that happened this morning on the Kerch Bridge. As a reminder, and without getting too much into it since there's so much speculation going on, and the SBU stated clearly, no details of the explosion will be released until after victory. I leave you with the words regarding Kerch Bridge from General Budanov. It is excess construction, it is redundant, and it will be taken down. Looking at the Russian enemy, we have seen some very interesting events going on there as well. We have had the third group of Belarusian Wagnerites entering Belarus this morning. There was about 20 cars in the convoy. Had some questions yesterday regarding Prigozhin, something we're not going to get into because it's just too packed a day. But again, referencing back to what happened at the meeting of High Command, President Zelensky made clear a few days ago, we are not concerned as to what's taking place at the Belarusian border. The grain deal, also in the Russian sphere of influence, has been officially declared terminated by Putin's lackey, Peskov. And we can only wait to see what happens. But yet again, Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin, and all of his cabal in Moscow are carrying out blackmail, not just against Ukraine farmers and the Ukrainian people, but against the global community as a whole. This is pure terrorism. This comes directly from the Russian playbook. They're upset, they throw a tantrum. Clearly, they understand that there is no pathway to victory for them, and ultimately, Ukraine will return all of our territory, and they are just attempting to really be crybabies, for lack of a better term, until that happens. We have an interesting update from the Duma, where last week, Russia announced 147,000 new spring conscripts. Since that time, and I'm laughing because for those of you who don't know, Russia has a special penal group not associated with Wagner. They're called Storm Group Z, and it's made up of convicts. Now they're going to have a group of pensioners. They've just raised the age for conscripts at State Duma to 65 years old. So to give you an idea, they jumped it almost 9%. It was 18 to 60. Now it's 18 to 65 that can be mobilized due to this war that Putin has undertaken against the people of Ukraine. And Spravdi, which is a department of the Ukrainian government that focuses on Russian information, put out this statement upon the increase in age limit of the soon-to-be Russian soldiers, the Grandpa Battalion. And they have concluded that Putin has only really two options to carry out now. One is to go the Medvedev route and actually commit nuclear terrorism and nuclear catastrophe. Or two, continue to raise conscription, continue to mobilize, and continue to throw these people into a meat grinder, these Russians, as he genocides his own people in an attempt to continue genociding Ukrainians. And something we've also talked about in the past, in Russia, they don't care about lives. In Ukraine, we care about every life. And that especially counts towards the troops that have been serving during the full-scale invasion, as well as those having fought over the last 9 years. And Land Force today just put out a 10-minute survey preparing soldiers for post-victory life and demobilization. It's a survey that will prepare soldiers to re-enter the civilian workforce, to be able to get assistance with post-traumatic stress disorder, to be able to get help readjusting financially, mentally, and making certain that post-victory allows Ukraine to maintain its leadership in Europe and across the world in a well-earned position. Speaking of well-earned positions, 14 Russians have just earned their positions on a British sanction list, including the ministers of culture and education. This due to the United Kingdom finding them at fault for kidnapping Ukrainian children. And I really wish, as I'm sure many of you do, that the world would follow. If one of the G7 countries sanctions, everyone should get in line. It should be have some sort of reciprocity, and this would guarantee that there are no loopholes. Because ultimately right now, what do we understand about Russia? Russia is a criminal cabal, and what do criminals do in a mafia state? They understand how to get around the law. Now a quick rundown through the rest of Ukraine. In Kramatorsk, the SBU has announced the arrest of a second FSB informant who was involved in the terror attack on the pizza cafe a couple of weeks ago. On his phone, they found pictures and messages clearly tying him to the scene where he was actually counting those deceased, wounded, and otherwise healthy, and reporting back directly to Russia from the scene of the bombing. In Zaporizhia, 47,000 pieces of PPE were delivered to the oblast, medical PPE for doctors and nurses by the armed forces of Ukraine. Again, understanding that we have to have a civilian and military cooperation, and so the ZSU made certain to get these doctors and nurses the medical gear they need as the counteroffensive is going on. We talked a couple of days ago about evacuations from Sumy Oblast. specifically the border region. Today, Russian terrorism struck there. Along the border, there was a shelling, and we have civilians dead and injured. The exact count is unknown at this time, but again, our intelligence was strong enough to know that something would happen, and yet the Russians couldn't contain themselves. Luckily, the death toll could have been much higher, but thanks to the civilian authorities recommending evacuation, many people were not in the area that otherwise would have been. And moving to Kyiv, there was a bomb threat at one of the main hospitals today, which resulted in 250 patients and more than 200 employees having to be evacuated. Mayor Klitschko is monitoring the situation, and they are making certain that no ordinances are being found there. Speaking of ordinances, in Odessa, there's a continuous abundance of ordnance washing up on the beach. The police there warn everybody to please be careful. And lastly, one group that has been much talked about for the past 9 years due to their actions during the anti-terrorist operation and very heroic actions since then, especially since the full-scale invasion. We wish a happy birthday to the Pravi sector, otherwise now known as the 67th Separate Mechanized Brigade, who in November of 2022 relinquished their volunteer status, became a member of Special Forces, Special Operations, and were then taken to the United Kingdom for training. So to those in the 67th Mechanized Brigade, we are glad you are still fighting for the liberation of Ukraine over the last 9 years. At this point, I will go to questions that I had offered for people to send in by DM. One of the first questions that came in was, hi Sarah, a question about the mental health of the civilian populace as well as the troops, and what's going on and how are people still managing after 500 plus days of constant terrorism. How are people responding? I can tell you, people are responding in the way that we would hope all human beings would respond. They are living their lives. They are still contributing to victory. They are making sure their loved ones are taken care of. They understand what community is, and therefore it's most likely the best case scenario that anyone could have imagined, that the community, be it in a micro scale or across the nation, is still able to function 500 plus days later. Again, another question we had from earlier was about Prigozhin and what's going on there. I will just reiterate it because it came through. President Zelensky said, made very clear, there's no concern along the Belarusian border for an invasion. Whatever they're threatening on Russian propaganda channels, that they're going to go into NATO countries, that they're going to go and try to cut off our Polish allies and try to cut off Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, don't believe the hype. This is Sarah Ashton Cirillo with the Armed Forces of Ukraine saying, Slava Ukraini. May God bless our troops. And make sure to tune in tomorrow, same time, 1700 Kyiv, and to check out our YouTube channel at TDF Media Studios for all of our original content. And thanks for joining us. How was it?
Great.
It was good?